Before you, I thought love was only something that existed when another person was holding my hand. I thought I needed someone to validate me, to choose me, to make me feel enough. I believed that without someone's constant reassurance, I would be incomplete. But the truth is, I had never actually learned how to love the person staring back at me in the mirror. You see, we grow up being told fairy tales, that love is when someone sweeps in and saves you. That it's when someone fights for you, chooses you, and never lets go. But no one tells you that the most important love story you'll ever live is the one you have with yourself. And it often takes losing someone you thought you couldn't live without to realize that the person you truly needed was you. When you left, I didn't just lose a relationship, I lost the version of me that thought love had to come from somewhere outside. I was forced to face the silence, the empty room, and the echo of my own thoughts, and it was terrifying, but in that silence I also heard something I had ignored for years, my own voice, the one that whispered, "You're enough, you've always been enough." That's when I started building something beautiful, not a wall to protect myself from love, but a home inside my soul, a place where I could feel safe without needing someone to make me feel it. A place where my worth didn't change based on who stayed or who left. And as I began to love myself, really love myself, everything shifted. I stopped chasing people who made me feel like I had to earn their affection. I stopped negotiating my standards just to keep someone around. I stopped apologizing for taking up space, and here's the magic. The more I fell in love with myself, the more my life began to attract people who could love me in the right way, not because I needed them, but because I chose them. When someone you loved walks away, the first thing you often feel is the echo of their absence. It's not just the silence that fills the room, it's the way the silence seems to wrap itself around you, pressing in from all sides, making you notice every little thing they used to do. The way they used to fill a space without even trying. The way you could always sense them in the room before you even looked up, and now, nothing, just quiet, just you, and for some people that silence becomes unbearable. They start scrambling to fill it with noise, with distractions, with anyone who can stand in that empty space so they don't have to face what's left. But if you're brave enough to sit in that silence, something incredible begins to happen. You hear your own voice. And for some of us, it's a voice we've ignored for years. I remember the first time I truly sat alone after someone I loved left. At first, it wasn't some empowering movie-like moment. It was messy. I would check my phone every few minutes, hoping maybe they'd text, maybe they'd realize they made a mistake, maybe they'd remember I was worth staying for. I'd replay every conversation we had, every fight, every moment where I could have been softer, kinder, quieter, more agreeable. I'd pick apart my own words like they were a puzzle, trying to find the one wrong piece that made them leave, and the more I did that, the smaller I felt. Like I was shrinking into the version of myself that believed love was something I had to earn by being perfect. But here's the truth I didn't see then. If you have to become less of yourself for someone to love you, they're not actually loving you, they're loving the version of you that hides. And the moment you realize that, you start to understand the difference between being chosen and being truly seen. The shift happened slowly. I didn't wake up one morning and suddenly feel whole again. I started with small things. I began asking myself questions I had never really asked before. What do I actually like? And not what I liked because they liked it. Not what I liked because it made me seem more compatible or easier to love. Just me. My coffee order changed. The music I played in the morning was different. I started walking instead of driving just so I could feel the air on my face. I started cooking meals I loved, even if nobody else was there to share them. These were small acts, but they mattered. Because every time I chose something just for me, I was telling myself, your preferences matter, your voice matters, you matter. It's strange how easy it is to lose sight of yourself when you're so focused on keeping someone else happy. You start editing your words before they even leave your mouth. You start checking your face in the mirror not for yourself, but to make sure you look the way they like. You start letting little things slide because you don't want to rock the boat, and before you know it, the person in the mirror doesn't even look like you anymore. They look like a version of you designed to be palatable. A version built to fit someone else's comfort zone. When you finally sit in the stillness after they're gone, you're faced with the raw, unfiltered truth. You abandoned yourself long before they abandoned you. That's a hard pill to swallow, but it's also the first step to becoming your own safe place, because the moment you see it, you can start changing it. I began writing letters to myself. I know it sounds strange, but I would literally write, "I'm proud of you for making it through today. I know it hurt. I know you wanted to call them. I know you thought about what you did wrong, but you stayed. You didn't run from yourself. You're learning to be with you again." At first, it felt almost childish, but over time, those letters became my anchor. They reminded me that my relationship with myself needed as much attention, patience, and love as any relationship I had with another person. And this is where people often misunderstand self-love. They think it's about spa days, fancy dinners alone, or telling yourself you're beautiful in the mirror, and sure, those can be part of it. But real self-love is much deeper. It's the way you talk to yourself in your most vulnerable moments. It's the way you comfort yourself when you're disappointed. It's how you treat yourself on the days you feel unworthy. It's keeping promises to yourself, even the small ones. It's saying, "I'll go for that walk today," and actually doing it not because you have to, but because you respect the commitments you make to yourself. The more I practiced these small acts of love toward myself, the more I started to feel safe with me. And that's the key: safety. People think the opposite of loneliness is company, but it's not. The opposite of loneliness is feeling safe in your own presence. When you are your own safe place, being alone stops feeling like punishment and starts feeling like peace. You stop scanning the room for someone to notice you because you already notice yourself. You stop craving the validation of someone's approval because you've already given yourself permission to be exactly who you are. And here's what surprised me most: the more I loved myself, the less tolerance I had for anything that disrupted my peace. I used to think I was too sensitive or too picky when I got uncomfortable with certain behaviors. But in reality, my body was just trying to tell me, this isn't safe for us, this isn't love. When you're your own safe place, you trust those signals. You don't override them just to keep someone in your life. You don't gaslight yourself into believing their neglect is your fault. You stop explaining away the moments that hurt, and you start honoring the way they make you feel. I learned that boundaries aren't about pushing people away, they're about keeping yourself close. They're the walls that protect your home, not the chains that lock the door. And when you love yourself enough to set those boundaries, the people who respect you will stay, and the people who don't will leave. Either way, you're safe. Either way, you're whole. The day I truly felt this was the day I walked into a coffee shop alone, ordered my favorite drink, sat down, and didn't pull out my phone. I didn't look around to see who might be watching me. I didn't feel the need to text anyone to fill the space. I just sat there, sipping my coffee, watching life move around me, and I felt this wave of calm wash over me. It hit me. I wasn't waiting for someone to arrive to make the moment better. The moment was already enough. I was already enough. Falling in love with yourself doesn't mean you'll never want or need other people. It doesn't mean you shut yourself off from relationships or connection. It means that connection becomes a choice, not a lifeline. You share your life because you want to, not because you're afraid of what happens if you don't. It means you stop handing people the blueprint for your happiness and expecting them to build it for you. You build it yourself, and if someone comes along, they're welcome to add to it, but they'll never be the foundation. It's a strange kind of freedom, this self-love. It's quiet, it's not flashy, it's not the kind of love story that gets made into a movie. But it's the kind that lasts, because no matter who walks into your life or walks out, you stay. You're there when the lights go out. You're there when the world feels heavy. You're there when you're laughing so hard your stomach hurts. You're there when you're crying into your pillow at 3 a.m. You are the constant, and once you understand that, you stop fearing the end of relationships, because you know you'll always have the most important one, the one with yourself. I can't promise the journey will be easy. There will be days you'll slip back into old habits, days you'll wish you could just hand the responsibility of loving you to someone else. But every time you choose to stay, to listen, to care for yourself, you strengthen that bond. And one day you'll wake up and realize you're not just surviving anymore, you're thriving. You're not just filling the silence, you're enjoying it. You're not just okay with being alone, you're in love with it. And that's when you'll know you've become your own safe place. Not because someone taught you how to be, but because you decided you were worth the effort, because you chose you. Because after everything, after the heartbreak, after the silence, after the loneliness, you came home to yourself. And there's nothing more beautiful than that. There's a strange thing that happens when you start to know your worth, the kind of strange that feels like waking up in a room you've been sleeping in your whole life, but suddenly realizing the furniture doesn't belong to you. You look around at the relationships you've kept, the conversations you've tolerated, the way you've let people show up for you, and it hits you. You've been surviving on crumbs, little pieces of love thrown your way just often enough to keep you hoping for more. But never enough to actually fill you. When you don't know your worth, those crumbs feel like a feast. You convince yourself that late night texts, sporadic attention, or half-hearted apologies are signs of care. You call it love when it's really inconsistency wrapped in charm. You tell yourself they're busy or not good at expressing their feelings, because the alternative, admitting they're just not giving you what you deserve, is too painful to face. But the more you fall in love with yourself, the less hungry you are for those scraps. You stop mistaking barely enough for just enough. You start seeing patterns where before you saw excuses. And instead of holding onto the hope that they'll change, you start holding onto the truth that you don't need to wait for them to. I remember a time when I would sit by the phone, not wanting to go out or make plans, just in case they called. And when they finally did, hours or even days later, I'd answer like nothing was wrong, pretending I was just happy to hear from them. I trained myself to accept unpredictability because I thought that's just how love worked. You wait, you hope, you take what you can get. But the moment I started valuing myself, I realized that's not love. That's self-abandonment disguised as loyalty. Loving yourself shifts the entire equation. You no longer measure someone's feelings for you by what they say when they're trying to keep you. You measure it by how consistently they show up without being asked. You pay attention to how they treat you when there's nothing in it for them. You notice whether they keep their promises, not just the big, romantic ones, but the small, everyday ones that build trust over time. And when you start holding people to that standard, you lose a lot of relationships, but you gain yourself. You stop feeling guilty for saying, "This isn't enough for me." You stop feeling like you're asking for too much when all you're asking for is reciprocity. You realize that the love you've been giving away so freely is rare, and that giving it to someone who can't handle it is like pouring water into a cracked glass. No matter how much you give, it'll never be full. One of the most powerful moments in my life was the day I walked away from someone who wasn't treating me badly, but also wasn't treating me well. It's easy to leave when someone's cruel, but it takes real self-worth to leave when someone is simply lukewarm. Because you're not walking away from obvious pain, you're walking away from the comfort of just okay. To make space for the extraordinary, that's what knowing your worth does. It makes you unwilling to settle for almost. And the beauty of this shift is that it doesn't come from arrogance or thinking you're better than anyone. It comes from finally understanding that love is not meant to drain you, that relationships are not meant to keep you in a constant state of proving yourself, that you don't have to shrink, beg, or wait for love to be given in full. You deserve to be met where you are with the same energy, care, and effort you give so freely. When you stop accepting crumbs, you send a powerful message to the world and to yourself that you believe in abundance. You believe that the love you want exists and that you're worth waiting for it. You stop grasping at whatever's in front of you out of fear you might not find better. You stop keeping people around because you're afraid of the gap they'll leave. You trust that you can stand in that gap yourself until the right person arrives, and the best part, once you raise that standard, you can never go back. Once you've tasted what it's like to be valued, respected, and chosen consistently, the idea of returning to inconsistency feels like trying to live in a house you've outgrown. You know it doesn't fit anymore. You know you deserve more space to breathe, and you're no longer afraid to walk out the door in search of it. Something almost magical happens when you truly love yourself, the kind of magic that isn't loud or flashy, but subtle, like the way the air feels different right before it rains. Without even realizing it, the energy you give off changes. You carry yourself differently. You speak differently. You look people in the eyes longer because you're not hiding anymore. You don't rush to fill silences because you're no longer afraid of what they might reveal. And the shift doesn't just change how you feel about yourself. It changes the kind of people who are drawn to you. When you don't love yourself, you often attract relationships that confirm your fears. If deep down you believe you're not good enough, you'll find yourself surrounded by people who treat you like you're not. Not because the world is cruel, but because on some unconscious level, you're picking people who feel familiar, even if familiar has always meant neglect, inconsistency, or conditional love. You gravitate toward what you know, even if it hurts. And that cycle can go on for years without you even seeing it. But the moment you begin to love yourself, and I mean truly, unapologetically love yourself, you disrupt that pattern. Suddenly, the things you used to tolerate feel heavy in your chest. The comments you used to laugh off feel sharp in your ears. The behaviors you once justified start to feel like alarms going off. And because you no longer abandon yourself to keep people around, you actually listen to those alarms. You don't silence them for the sake of comfort, you act. I remember the first time I met someone after I had really started valuing myself. In the past, I would have overlooked the small ways they showed disinterest. I would have leaned in harder, tried to be more interesting, more engaging, more what I thought they wanted. But this time was different. I noticed they were distracted, checking their phone often, not asking me much about myself. And instead of trying to win their attention, I just let it go, not out of bitterness, but because I knew that someone who couldn't be present with me in the first few moments wasn't going to magically become present later. I didn't see it as a loss, I saw it as clarity. That's the power of self-love. It gives you clarity faster. You don't need weeks or months of confusion to figure out if someone respects you. You can feel it almost instantly because your own respect for yourself has become the baseline. And when that's your baseline, you stop entertaining people who can't meet it. Not out of arrogance, but out of alignment. And here's the thing, people can feel this energy. When you walk into a room carrying self-respect, it's in your posture, in the way you listen, in the way you don't over-explain yourself. It's in your calm when someone tries to test your boundaries. It's in your willingness to walk away quietly rather than fight to prove your worth. That kind of energy doesn't scream, "I'm better than you." It whispers, "I'm at peace with myself." And that's magnetic in a way no performance can replicate. You start attracting people who are also at peace with themselves. People who don't need to control you to feel secure. People who see your independence as beautiful, not threatening. People who aren't interested in breaking down your boundaries, but in respecting them. And because you're no longer desperate for connection, you can choose who stays in your life instead of clinging to whoever arrives. The irony is, when you truly love yourself, you might actually have fewer people around you. But the ones who remain, or the ones who show up, are gold. They're not there because you fill some void in them. They're there because they genuinely value you, because they want to share in your life, not take over it. These are the kinds of relationships where you can breathe, where you feel safe enough to be messy, where you don't have to be on all the time, and the most beautiful part, when you love yourself, you're no longer looking for people to complete you, you're looking for people to complement you. You're not searching for someone to fix the cracks in your foundation. You've already done that. You're inviting people in to decorate the home you've already built within yourself. And when someone comes into that space, they don't have the power to tear it down because it was never built for them to hold up in the first place. Self-love doesn't mean you stop wanting love from others. It means you can want it without needing it to survive, and that makes you infinitely more powerful because you stop settling for the illusion of love and start waiting for the real thing. There's a fear that sits deep in so many of us, a fear that can dictate our choices, shape our relationships, and keep us tethered to people who don't truly see us. It's the fear of being alone. And it's powerful because it whispers in moments of doubt. What if you never find someone better? What if this is as good as it gets? What if you walk away and regret it forever? That fear convinces people to stay where love has stopped growing. It convinces them to shrink themselves so they can fit inside the limb it's someone else has placed on them. It convinces them that something, even if it's breaking them slowly, is better than nothing. For years, I carried that fear without even realizing it. I told myself I stayed in certain relationships because I loved the person, because loyalty mattered, because no relationship is perfect. And while all of that may have been true in part, the deeper truth was this: I didn't trust myself to be okay on my own. The idea of waking up without someone's texts to read, of having no one to tell my day to, of sitting in a room where my phone stayed silent, it felt unbearable. I thought that if I had to face that kind of emptiness, I'd break. But here's what I've learned: you don't break when you're alone. You break when you abandon yourself to avoid being alone. You break when you silence your needs, swallow your pain, and ignore the parts of you that are screaming for more just so you don't have to face the quiet. The quiet isn't the enemy, it's the truth teller. The first time I really faced solitude, I hated it. I fought against it with everything I had. I filled my schedule with meaningless plans, answered texts from people I didn't even like, and said yes to things I didn't want to do just so I wouldn't have to sit with myself. I thought that staying busy meant I was strong, but in reality I was just running from the fact that without the distraction of someone else's presence, I didn't know who I was. It wasn't until I stopped running that everything began to change. One evening, I turned off my phone, closed my laptop, and sat in the living room with nothing but a cup of tea and the sound of my own breathing. At first, the silence was deafening. My mind screamed at me to grab my phone, check my messages, do anything to avoid the discomfort. But I stayed, and in that stillness I began to hear myself, not the self I performed for others, not the self I adjusted to be loved, but the self that existed before anyone else's opinion mattered. I asked myself questions I had been too afraid to answer. What do you want that you haven't admitted out loud? What are you holding on to that's hurting you? What are you pretending is fine because you don't want to lose someone? And the answers hit me like a wave. I realized that so much of my life had been shaped around avoiding loneliness rather than pursuing joy. I was making choices to prevent loss, not to create fulfillment. And that's no way to live. Here's the thing about solitude: once you stop resisting it, it stops feeling like punishment. It becomes space to hear yourself. Space to heal without someone else's voice interrupting your process. Space to make decisions based on your truth rather than your fear. You start to see that being alone isn't about the absence of love, it's about the presence of self. And when you can sit in that presence without feeling restless or desperate, you become unstoppable. Because here's the quiet secret no one tells you. Once you know you can be happy on your own, no one can control you with the threat of leaving. You stop bending your boundaries to keep people. You stop ignoring your intuition because you're afraid it will lead to an empty bed. You stop saying yes when your soul is screaming no. You stop settling for "at least they're here" when you know you're capable of more. And it's not just about having the strength to walk away from what's wrong. It's about having the patience to wait for what's right. When you're not afraid to be alone, you don't grab the first thing that comes along just to fill the space. You can stand in that space day after day, trusting that what's meant for you will arrive, and if it doesn't, you'll still be okay. That kind of self-trust is rare and it's magnetic. I've noticed that people who aren't afraid to be alone walk differently. They don't scan the room hoping to be noticed, they notice themselves. They don't ask for permission to take up space, they take it. They don't cling to relationships out of desperation, they choose them out of desire. And when someone enters their life, it's not because they're filling a void, but because they're adding to a life that's already rich and full. The irony is that when you no longer fear being alone, you often end up with deeper, healthier connections. Why? Because you're no longer performing for love. You're no longer bending into shapes to be chosen. You're showing up as you are, and the people who love you for that version of you are the ones worth keeping. You no longer have to wonder if they'd still be there if you stopped trying so hard. You know they would, because they're there for the real you. And perhaps the most beautiful part of this is the freedom it brings. Freedom to say no without guilt. Freedom to walk away without bitterness. Freedom to take time for yourself without fearing it will cost you someone's affection. Freedom to love fully, not because you need to, but because you want to. You become a whole person who shares your life, not half a person looking for someone to complete you. I used to think the bravest thing a person could do was fall in love. Now, I think the bravest thing is to stand in an empty room, look yourself in the eye and say, "I'm enough," and not "I'm enough for them," and not "I'm enough for someday when the right person comes along," just enough as you are right now in this moment, because once you believe that, no goodbye can take your worth with it. No rejection can make you question your value. No absence can make you feel incomplete. You stop clinging to people like life rafts, because you realize you were never drowning in the first place, you were just afraid to swim alone. And once you start swimming, once you feel the water carrying you, once you trust yourself not to sink, you'll wonder why you ever begged someone else to keep you afloat. When you're no longer afraid of being alone, love becomes something entirely different. It's not a transaction, it's not a safety net. It's not a way to prove you're worthy. It's a choice freely made between two people who are already whole, and that's the kind of love that lasts not because it has to, but because it wants to. And if there's one thing I hope you take away from this, it's that you can get there. No matter how much you've relied on others to feel complete, no matter how long you've stayed in relationships out of fear, no matter how uncomfortable the quiet feels right now, you can learn to love your own company so deeply that being alone feels like coming home. And once you do, you'll never again let the fear of solitude keep you in places you don't belong. You'll walk away when you need to, you'll stay when it's right, and you'll know, without question, that you are whole with or without anyone else by your side. So here we are, after the heartbreak, after the silence, after the unraveling of everything you thought you needed to feel whole. You're still here, breathing, standing, learning, loving. Not in the same way you loved before, not with the same desperation to be chosen, not with the same fear of being left, but with a love that began in the quiet and grew roots in your own soul. You may have thought losing them would be the end of you. And in some ways, it was the end of the version of you that didn't know your worth, that accepted less, that feared the quiet. But what you didn't see then is that it was also the beginning. The beginning of the version of you who wakes up in the morning knowing you are enough before you've done a single thing to earn it. The version who can sit in an empty room and feel full. The version who chooses love without needing it to survive. After them, you didn't just put yourself back together, you rebuilt differently. Stronger, softer in the right places, harder in the ones that protect your peace. And maybe that's what they never understood. You didn't need saving. You needed to meet yourself. You needed to see that your worth was never tied to who stayed or who left. So let them say what they will. Let them wonder how you did it. Let them think you moved on too fast or too slow or in the wrong way. They'll never truly know, because they'll never feel what you feel now, the calm in your chest when you're alone, the steady heartbeat that isn't racing to keep up with anyone else, the quiet joy of knowing you are your own home. This is your story now, not a story of being left but of finding, not of losing someone but of gaining yourself. And when you look back, you won't remember the exact day you stopped loving them. You'll remember the moment you started loving you. In that will be the love story that lasts a lifetime.